Hey, this is Chris. Sorry about the wait. We should be rocking and rolling. Oh, let's find out. Test, test, test. Okay, perfect. Got the new mic set up. Just wanted to make sure it was working. And we're like actually rocking and rolling today. And I'm not completely a doofus like I was last time. Uh, okay. Today, obviously, this is our second episode of Raiding in the Wasteland. This is our faction focus series on the Raiders for Wasteland Warfare. I am Chris. I am going to be talking with everybody, and then, like I said, I will be at some point working with other players to get their thoughts and feelings about some of the other factions the Euros are on. I don't know what that means, Bailey. That's like some soccer stuff. Uh, so I'm not a soccer fan or a football fan, if you will. Viva Italia, as the kids say. This is actually good that you're on here. What did you say? What? Careful, he'll get you. Well, today we're talking about Fallout. Actually, next week is Blood Bowl, so don't worry, buddy. Uh, this is actually going to be the next goal for me is to get you on this game because it is fantastic and you'll enjoy it if you just get over your fear of skirmish games. So, faction focus, Raiders. The last episode we talked about just Raiders as a whole and a little bit of things of that nature. Today we're going to focus on Psychos. Those are my favorite out of everything in the game in terms of, well, the Raiders faction options. I shouldn't say the game. I haven't seen the whole game yet. I can, if we need to, share my screen at some point. I got BlueStacks pulled up so I can be looking at stuff. And yeah, I will. I'll get you to play Blood Bowl. How horrible of me. Just saw that again and wanted to remind you, you're going to Tampa to play Blood Bowl with me. Alright, once this gets back, go home. Come on, load up, dude. Beep, beep, beep. There we go. Home. Did BlueStacks just say no? I think it did. Well, let's reload it. BlueStacks. So we're going to load up BlueStacks because I wanted to have things in front of me as we spoke. I don't want, or as I speak. Oh no, the fight's out. Don't demonetize. Oh, I'm not even monetized. It doesn't matter. I'm about to punch, yo. Lights out. I guess I can do whatever I want because I don't have to worry about losing money yet. I guess that's not true. I make a meager amount of money on Twitch. Whereas with YouTube, I make $0. Speaking of that, while I'm waiting for BlueStacks to load, if you do like the videos, please consider subscribing. Once I hit 1,000 subscribers, I promise I'll stop haranguing people about subscribing. Once I hit 1,000, I start getting paid for my time, and that makes it a lot easier for me to continue to do this and to do it more frequently. So, now that we got through that, let's start talking about Psychos. Got BlueStacks all loaded up. Let's go to Units. Do I need to share screens? Do you guys want to see it? Or do you want to see me? I'm pretty handsome. And this will go on podcast. Let's see. Do we have a laptop screen share on here? We don't right now. So let me pull it up and then we'll flip over to a screen share so you can see what I'm seeing. Wow, this is terrible on BlueStacks. Just in case anybody was curious. I may not be sharing it just because this looks awful. Let's pull up Psychos. And that's the order we're going to go in. We're going to go through all the base units or cards first. And then once we go through those base cards, then we'll kind of talk about the named characters and the extra stuff. So let me pow. POW, display capture, add laptop screen, bonk. There we go. And really, we just need this middle section, I believe. So let's cut that out for now. And let's just put the recycle card up here. And then hopefully, once I start talking about equipment and stuff, we won't need to mess it around too much. So, Psychos. I dropped my pocket. Sorry about that. Psychos. First of all, they're very fast. They move red, which is 6 inches, if memory serves correctly. And then remember, you add the size of your base to that because you leapfrog the rulers in Wasteland Warfare. So they actually end up moving about 7.5 inches. And that's pretty meaty. Most of the game is going to move yellow, which is 4 plus your base size, which is going to end up being like 5, maybe 6 at the most. So to get that extra 1.5 inches, 2 inches of movement is pretty, well, I guess it's 2 to 2.5, you know. But it's pretty meaty. But the big one is that charge of green, because that's an 8-inch charge. That's really far. And then there's ways you can kind of cheese that to get it a little further, especially the movement. The strength of 3 doesn't matter so much because you're not necessarily relying on strength for everything or anything. You're not going to, they can't take heavy weapons. Their melee isn't strength based. You don't have a lot of issues there. Their perception is 5, so they are average with a pistol. I personally don't tend to give them a pistol. There's nothing wrong with giving them a pistol. It's just not how I use them. I tend to keep them very well hidden, very, very sneak up behind you with some things, you know, and then torpedo them into things. I rely on their speed and terrain. And I will do a whole episode or maybe even a series on terrain in this game. Sorry, I had something in my peripheral I needed to move. And when I do that, we'll talk about why terrain's super important. Because most of the tables that I see are very sparse. And I've had people be like, I don't understand how you play Raiders, man. And I'm like, well, you gotta have good terrain. The way most people play, it's just a shooting gallery. If you play Raiders, you can't play that way. You've got to have some terrain, and you have to understand how to screen your models. But perception of 5 means you got about a 45 to 55% hit rate. Again, I don't have the conversion chart right in front of me, but you got about a 45 to 55% hit rate when you're shooting a pistol. Obviously, if you have a green die or multiple green dice, that can add to it. Shooting into a melee can add to it, etc. Endurance is 4, so you get 4 health. So they're very glass cannon, right? They're not staying on the table. And those that are watching, if you know me, like that tends to be the way I play. Even with orcs, like 10th ed orcs, yeah, they're a bit more resilient in 40k. But with regard to how I play them, it's a lot of high speed, get there, do my damage, and whatever happens after that, whatever. Charisma is 3. They can't battle cry, but they can resist battle cry because they have the white battle cry icon. So, that's okay. I don't really care. That's not what we take them for. And then intelligence of 2. Again, we're not taking them to lockpick, but it is nice to know that if you have that secondary on the table, they can at least roll a die and attempt it. But now we get to agility, and this is the sweet spot for me. You know, that's what your melee's based off of for them, and they get grenades with a green range. So, you know, you've got an 8-inch grenade threat range, and I tend to give them like a Molotov or something, some sort of simple grenade. Just to have that there. So that if I need to, I can always throw a grenade, and they're cheap. But really, that's what they're there for. They're there for the melee. They're there for the bonk. Now, they're light armored. If they have any clothing or any armor cards equipped, you reduce their movements plural. And that's one of the things that I've started to see with this game, is they consider a charge a movement. So if something's supposed to modify both, it'll have it pluralized. If it's only going to modify your actual movement, it'll be singular. And if it's only supposed to modify your charge, it should say charge. I've not come across anything that deviates from that too much. That doesn't mean it doesn't. It just means I haven't seen it yet. Automatically succeeds at first climb test during a climb. that's actually really helpful, especially because they move red, so they can actually climb yellow, and they automatically succeed their first test. So that means they can get up and get down very easily. When you couple these things with just about anything, they can be very dangerous. So before we dig into loadouts, let's talk about usage. They don't stay on the table. And that's the biggest complaint I've heard from people is, hey man, I don't understand why you love things so much. They just die. I can't get them where they need to be. Or if I do get them there, it's like they only have 1 health left and then they just die, etc. So the usage for them, there's a way to kind of keep them alive. And it relies on using your other models. One thing I would suggest is if you haven't used them yet, I just got a box here, and that's get some dogs. And that's because dogs move, I believe they move green and charge blue, and dogs can charge without needing line of sight. And then because you have specific raiders dogs, once your dogs are in, you can charge without line of sight. And I think dogs do that anyway, but it helps you to have a dog that can charge without line of sight, go tag something, and then your psychos can then get in without having to have line of sight. So it allows you to kind of set your psychos up for charges without having to throw like your psycho out in the open or maybe put something else out there. Your other option is to have a chunkier model like a Coulter or something in power armor and have it leading the way with those psychos behind it. Because remember, your models don't block line of sight, but your models do give cover to your other models. So if somebody wants to shoot your psycho, and this is why, and I'll do a whole episode on Coulter, but we're going to touch on him right now briefly. If you're playing Raiders and you play a melee-centric game, you have to take Coulter. Like, he is that good because of what he brings to the table. He's not a damage dealer, and he's not going to stay on the table forever. But the way he buffs your other Raiders means he's worth bringing in almost every game if you can. He's got that aura of -2 to hit, which will help, and it stacks with cover. So you could actually put your Raiders behind Coulter to get cover from Coulter, and then -2 to hit those Raiders from Coulter as well, giving them cover and another -2 for a total of -4. So it's one of those, like, you have to use terrain and your other models in such a way that it keeps those Raiders alive, or it forces people to kind of look at the Raiders and go, those are dangerous, but maybe I'm only hitting those Raiders on like a 2 or a 3 because of cover, etc. Whereas I can just shoot over here, and they're not as dangerous, but I'm not modified, so I'm way more likely to at least get the damage through. And that's a big part of the Raider play style, in my opinion, is understanding how to present targets so that your opponent goes, well, I either have a heavily modified to try to get rid of the thing that I know is going to kill me, or I take the easier shots but leave that really dangerous model alone. And that's really what you want to do with them. And like I said, terrain and scenery do play a big part of it. If you guys are playing with very few pieces, there's no point in taking psychos unless you have enough chunkier things that once the psychos die, you're still good, you know. But if you're not going to play with enough scenery, you know, if it's more of a narrative type game as opposed to something like battle mode where it's designed to be balanced, then you do what you want. Like I said, I'm not telling you how to play, but I'm telling you, don't be surprised if your psychos get killed. But if you go into a battle mode style game where the game is supposed to be balanced-ish to at least put everybody on a reasonable footing, there's a certain amount of terrain and a certain way you want to lay it out that will help everybody. It will allow the shooting factions to still shoot. It'll allow the handful of melee-based factions to still melee, and it'll kind of make everybody feel better and present a better, more balanced game. If that's something you really want to deep dive into, let me know in the comments if you're on YouTube or Twitch or in the chat. Obviously, I would love to, and I probably will anyway, but the more people that tell me yes, do it, the sooner I'll get it done. So that's how we move the raiders, right? We move them in a way so that they're always behind somebody. If you can bring dogs, you bring dogs so that they can charge, and then you can charge with the raiders, and nothing will need line of sight. If you don't bring dogs, you need chunkier things like Coulter, who they can hide behind and get bonuses so that they stay alive longer. And that's how I would use them. You know, they are not your primary get out in the front and go do damage immediately. They are more of a secondary, like, second wave. And that's what you need to do also with raiders, is you're playing this game in waves. You're not sending everybody out. They're not Brotherhood. They are not Enclave. They are not going to go sit on an objective, hold the objective, and tank the objective, right? What you need to do with them is you're going to send one or two of the really cheap dudes out to sit on an objective to try to bait your opponent onto the objective. And then you're going to send wave after wave, one at a time, one at a time. You're going to kind of trickle them out. And that's what the psychos are good for, is that turn 3, turn 2, like 2, 3, 4. Like, that's where your psychos are really going to hit. And it's hard to say when, just because the flow of the game is going to dictate that. If the game is going at a state where you just can't leave terrain that well yet, it's obviously going to happen later than it is sooner. But if your opponent is very aggressive, it'll happen sooner than later. And these are just things to keep in mind. So now that we understand psychos, and I've talked about a little bit how I like to play them and why I've had some pretty good success with them, we're going to dig into their loadouts a bit. We're going to start with weapons. Obviously, I don't put armor on them. We're going to talk about the different weapons that I like to use with them. We're going to talk about the different chems that I like to use with them. And then we're going to talk about the different perks and maybe some of the leader perks that you can layer with them to kind of make them better. So let's actually start. Let me pull up the library. We'll start with the leader perks. Yep, leader. Because that's going to be a much smaller list. Berserker, I don't think was one that we needed to worry about. It's okay. Obviously, the big thing with Berserker, you're not put. So let me start here. Give me a second. We're not gonna put the leader perk on the Psycho. That's a dirty straw, and I don't like it. Disgusting. I need some water. Sorry. We're not going to put the leader perks on the Psychos. It's just different leader perks you can put on things to help the Psychos. Let me widen that a little bit so you guys can see it a little bit better. There we go. So this one isn't terrible because you can give the Psychos an orange battle cry. But battle cry is really, again, not what you're taking the Psychos for. And then whoever you put this on gets an armor token. But again, the model you would want to put it on is Coulter, and Coulter has power armor, so you don't even really need the armor token, so it's kind of superfluous. Bodyguard, no. Brawler, Dirty Fighter, Charming, again, not important. Brawler would be good, like if you have Coulter, Brawler would be good because it does help his battle cry, etc. But when leader activated, okay, so this one's not terrible. Because when your leader's activated, but before it performs any actions, models within line of sight immediately perform a free orange move action, but can't use it to engage, but it is only once per battle. So Coordinator is actually pretty good, because it does give you a little bit of extra movement. Yes, it's only once per game, but in an army that requires a lot of movement, and specifically with Psychos, that orange movement could be huge. But what it also does is it gives you an aura of you get quick action move, quick action charge. And that's awesome because your raiders already move, the Psychos specifically charge green. So when they quick action, they'll charge red because it's one color shorter. So you're still going to be just as mobile as everybody else. And couple that with the fact that it is fantastic when you put it on Coulter specifically, because he ignores the quick action penalties because he's a cheater. And you're going to have those psychos anchored to him. They are going to be attached at his hip. So it's going to give you just a clump of dudes that have very good mobility. And if you get some action points, it's going to allow you to go even further. So it's one of those, like, Coordinator's really good, especially if you take Coulter and you keep those psychos around Coulter. There was one or two others that I thought were really good. Give me a second. We'll kind of dig through these. And again, if you are a player and you're watching, feel free to throw in the comments things that you think would work well. Or the chat, I guess, because we're live. I don't think it was Tactician. Actually, Tactician isn't terrible. Again, and I don't mean to keep saying take Coulter, take Coulter, take Coulter. But guess what? Take Coulter. Models up to orange from the leader do not count towards models when determining advantage. So again, if we're keeping those psychos kind of anchored or tied to him, it will help you maintain prio. And then in addition to that, it helps protect Coulter while he's giving the buff to the people around him. Because he's got his -2 to hit aura, but it doesn't affect Coulter. But what it does do is when you want to target Coulter, your own models block line of sight when targeting Coulter. So you've got to be very careful with your positioning to make sure you can line up multiple shots. So again, Tactician's a pretty solid choice. Specifically if you take Coulter. Most of the things that I talk about are going to assume that we're taking Coulter because he's just the bee's knees. Nope, we don't need that. Wasn't veteran. Was it wrestler? No. Warden, like I said, there was one specifically that I was like, hey, this is really good. And I can't remember what it's called. We looked at Tactician. Is it Stalker? Yes. Stalker is what I tend to take. The move of models activated during the same turn as the leader, which start out of enemy line of sight, is one color longer than usual. This does not affect the charge. But what that does do is that gives your psychos a movement of green as long as you bank your activations and do your psychos with whoever you put this on. Again, if it's me, I'm putting it on Coulter. The psychos are going to be attached to Coulter. I dropped my pocket again. Sorry about that. But the psychos are going to be attached to Coulter. And if I can keep the psychos out of line of sight, they're now going to move green. And again, that's what you need from those psychos, is you need that crazy mobility to position them wherever you need to get them where they've got to go. So those are what I would take in terms of if I were going to take some leadership traits. Stalker, Tactician, and then what was the other one we talked about? Was it Commander or Coordinator? Coordinator. So now let's look at perks. Because again, I don't know. I don't typically put perks on my psychos. I try to keep them very cheap. That's again just my approach to the game, though, is I've got a handful. Like Coulter ends up being expensive, but a lot of the rest of my gang I try to keep fairly cheap. I want my points to go into my actual equipment. Like I want my fire axe or whatever melee weapon I have to have a mod, for example, and that's kind of how I approach it. Action Boy or Action Girl isn't terrible if you plan on giving them like a Relentless or something that gives you access to these quick actions. Or if you have like Tactician, I think it was, whatever it is that lets you get quick action move charge. I think that was Coordinator actually. But whichever one it is, if you take that one, Action Boy or Action Girl isn't terrible to put on there because it does give you a chance, not a great one, but a chance to get an action point, which could be like a free charge. So you could like move charge and then still fight, for example. So that's not a bad way to go. It's not crazy expensive either. Adamantium Skeleton, you don't need to worry about. Anything that buffs their defense, don't even worry about it. because you're not going to buff it enough to keep them on the table. They're going to get hit by 1 or 2 melee attacks and they're going to go away. What you need them to do is you need them to get in, you need them to hit first, and then put as much damage on something as you can, and then just like let Jesus take the wheel from there. You know, you're not really worried about them staying around for too long. So, let's see. Attack dog. We don't need that. Armor. Yeah, we don't need any of that. Big Leagues is actually pretty solid, depending on what weapons you give, because it lets you reroll a blank on a damage die. But there's also just mods that you can take that while they won't do the same thing, they'll be just as good. You know, there's whatever the mod is that lets you, if you roll a blank on a yellow, a green, or a black die, one of those dice can count as an additional damage. And then there's the other mod that lets them count as an additional armor break. Those are also excellent. So anything that makes your dice more reliable, obviously, is going to be worth taking. Big Leagues, I think, is what, the five caps also. So again, 5 points, you can either maybe get an action point or you can re-roll a blank die. Those are not bad. Chem resistant, we don't necessarily need. Just because, again, you're a raider, you get the extra turn for your chems anyway. Collaborative is if it's engaged. So collaborative is not bad, but it's expensive. And I don't know that it's worth it because it's 15 points. And it's not that it's too expensive. It's that it's too expensive for how I play my raiders. You know, you might take something where collaborative is very useful, and that might be part of your game plan, and that's fine. But what collaborative does is if you shoot into a melee, if you're engaged and a friendly model shoots into the close combat, the shot affects the intended target. So if I put a raider with collaborative and I charge anything, when you shoot that, normally you'd randomize between all the models in melee, but while that collaborative model is engaged, you don't roll. It just hits the intended target. So again, it's not that it's bad. I just don't care. I don't take a ton of guns. You can ask anybody that I've played with. My raider list tends to be very melee centric. I have like a sniper rifle and or a heavy weapon. And then pretty much everything is pistol at best. I use a lot of dog tag fists to keep models cheap and give them a good melee weapon. And that is a good melee weapon. Let's see. Act, guided, protect. Nope, none of that. Companion. Nope. Nope. So like all this, finesse maybe. Nope. Fire resistant, ghoulish, gun nut. Well, definitely not worth putting heroic on them. Heroic is super weird. I feel like heroic for, again, and I'm talking from a battle mode perspective. I'm not talking from a narrative perspective. You know, heroic feels like one of those things that on the right models is very good, but it's almost a trap. You know, you're like, oh, this is so good, and then you take it, and it is good, but like, that's also basically another body you could have brought at 50 points. Lead belly, no. Light giver, no. Light step, not so much, but it's funny. Local leader, locksmith, medic, mend robot, moving target, yes. Moving target is worth taking. If you take 2 regular actions and you spend them to move and or charge during an activation, all ranged attacks suffer a -2 penalty until your next activation. If you become engaged at any time or at the start of part... Okay. The benefit ends at the start of your next activation, or if you become engaged, or when you start the performance of a reaction, or when you suffer a pushback, or when you take damage. So basically, as long as you don't do anything, you have an additional -2 penalty if you take 2 move actions. But again, for something that doesn't get to really wear armor, that's definitely worth. Again, if you can stack it with Coulter and cover, we've now stacked a -6 penalty, and people are going to just not shoot at you at that point, which is A-okay. That's what you want. Penetrator, I don't think. No, because that's a shooting. Yeah, that's what I thought. Refractor Rifleman. I mean, that's pretty much it, honestly. Maybe sneak, movement, and melee attacks are not triggers outside one range ruler distance. Like, those might not be terrible, but at the same time, it doesn't do you anything to get you there faster, and there's just other ways to close that distance. Weapon handling, strength requirements, and again, at strength 3, that's not worth. Travel light. So travel light is arguably worth it, because again, your move distance, and again, my assumption is that that's just the movement, that's not the charge, because I've seen where it's been pluralized to say move distances, but that is one thing that really needs to happen with this game, is it needs to get a little bit more consistent on the wording. But that's one of those things that's why I'm building the packets that I'm building, so that we can have that consistent wording when we play this game. You know, for a lot of people, they don't care about it, and that's fine. But for people like me who are like, I like the PvP aspect of this game, so we need some consistent wording. You know, that's more what it's intended for. But the move, even if it's just movement, you go from red to green, and then you could stack it with, what was that, coordinator, so it goes from green to blue. So you're now moving a blue base. Like, that's awesome. Absolutely awesome. Because that's what you need. And that will help them get where they need to go. You know, that is fantastic. So travel light is definitely worth for getting you there faster. And those are the perks that I would look at. I don't think any of them are any better than the other. I think they just kind of make you play your psychos a little bit differently. But that's how I would probably look at those psychos, is what can I do to get them where they need to be faster? What can I do? Oh my gosh, I have an extra hand. What is that? Oh. No, my son's just over here painting, sorry. That's what that hand was on my screen. We can see your little water cup here. And it was just, you're fine, dude. It was just really funny because all of a sudden there was this hand like dinking in the water. So that's what I try to do, is how can I maximize my ability to get them into melee? You know, because if I can't get them into melee, they're not doing anything. And if they're not doing anything, then they're getting shot at. And if they're getting shot at, then they're dying, which means they're not doing anything. You know. So now we're going to look at weapons, because that's like really the bread and butter of what they do. I don't really put much on psychos. Like I said, I tend to keep them as cheap as possible. So the two things I do is I give them a weapon, I give them a chem, and then I've kind of played around with some different perks, but about half the time I don't even put perks on them, just to kind of save those points. So let's take that off. Let's put that on. So we'll start with the weapons. Death Skull, Death Skull, Pincers, and Sting. I don't know what that is. Oh, it's a Rad Scorpion thing. Okay. I was a little confused. Shipbreaker Claw, Blood Bug, Centaur Lash. Is this all animal stuff? This looks like all animal stuff. Hound Bite. Yep. We want the regular melee. Oh, you know what I could do is we could go to forces. This would actually be easier. Create a new force. That's an NCR force I put together. Also, NCR, super fun. I love them with my whole body. Let's get Raiders pulled up. Really, this is what I should have done in the first place. But nobody accused me of being smart. There's that handsome Coulter. That boy. He sure do. Alright, so now we can come over and click on Psycho. Not sure what is happening here, bud. Just saw you stream and drop in and say hi. Do what you enjoy first and foremost. Absolutely. Just kind of talking about... I'm going to do an every other week where we do a deep dive in a faction. And right now I'm working on Raiders. And I'm just doing a really deep dive on psychos. But agreed, do what you like. And that's always been my biggest mantra is don't play something simply because it's good. Play it because you enjoy it. If you enjoy it and you play it, you'll figure out how to make it work. Now, that's not going to hold true for literally everything. There are going to be things in games where they're just so not good that they're just not good. But for the most part, if you just learn how to play the game, you can make most things work regardless of their meta or goodness. So it's always been my mantra to play what you like first and, worry about everything else later. Because if you just get good at the game, everything else will follow. So we're going to look at the weapons. So for me, how I play psychos is I tend to load up on black dice. Just because I can get those easily. And I need that, because of their role, I need them to do damage. Now, that doesn't mean all the other dice are bad. They all have their place. And I've tried a variety of weapons. The fire axe is one of my favorites. Before we dig in, this thing is awesome. Not for a psycho, but it is awesome. It's worth the 2 caps to put a dog tag fist on a model if you don't have a melee weapon, because it gives you the Nuka-Cola bottle stuns, and if you bypass the armor roll, it gets an additional damage, right? So if there's no armor roll required, you get to do an additional damage. So I love the dog tag fist. I think it's the best 2 caps you're going to spend in the game, hands down. All right, now let's dig through here. So I've tried the baseball bat. I don't hate it. That's oddly big. That's fine. Let's blow it up a little bit. There we go. I don't hate it. It gives you a black die and gives you a yellow die. I tend to give my psychos psycho, which gives me another black die. So I can get 2 black dice. I can get a yellow die. You can get some extra armor breaks. I just don't think for a psycho specifically, that's the best course of action. There's better weapons for the psycho in that points range. Same with the machete. It's not that it's bad, it's fine. The nail board is actually a good, solid choice. They're very cheap. It's easy to get another 1 or 2 black dice on it. If you charge, you can get the black or the green die. Having the extra yellow die is fantastic. And then, there's different mods you can put on things. So again, I think the nail board, very good choice. The wounding machete is also really good just because it can do extra damage. And it gives you a variety of dice. The Assaultron Blade, the Kami Whacker. I'll whack some commies. Tell you what. I'm going to tell you what. I'm looking for something specifically. I've done this one, and it's pretty good. Again, but that's how I play is I'm like, give me... Oh, yeah, that's fair, James. This is Fallout, Wasteland Warfare. It's a skirmish game based in the Fallout universe by Modifius. It is a fantastic game. If you've not played it, I would recommend looking into it. It is not... It's going to be, as far as a GW analog, it's going to be a lot more Necromunda and a lot less like Kill Team or Warcry. It's going to have a little bit of a chunky rules system. It's going to be a little bit more heavy on the rules. It is a great game. A lot of fun. I actually haven't played a ton of 40K. It was about 2 or 3 months ago, I made an announcement that I was really going to stop making a lot of 40K content just because I don't really enjoy 10th edition. And rather than continue to force myself to have to do something I don't like, as you are aware, I was just like, all right, I'm going to go find some other things. So, we have started kind of playing 40K, but it's been more like we've been taking different editions and kind of hodgepodging our own edition together. And that's been fun. But from a just playing standpoint, I don't think I've played an actual game of 10th edition in about 3 or 4 months outside of one game when all the rules changes dropped. But no, it's like I said, Fallout, great game, really cheap to get into. So it's one of those, like, if you've got the inclination and you've got a community that'll play it, it's definitely worth a look. The models are really cool. They are, a lot of them, resin. Take that for what it's worth, like, regardless of how you feel about it. I have had a blast with it, and we have been able to locally build a pretty sizable community for it. And by and large, it's just a very fun and enjoyable game. So the machete, super worth. You know, you get the 2 black dice. You take the Psycho, you get the 3rd black die. You can get a 4th black die on the charge if you want to. If you multi-charge, right, you get the dog in. You get an additional green die. So there's a lot of things you can do there as well. Definitely worth. The machete's pretty solid. The Gladius, I should say specifically. But this right here, Fire Axe is one of the ones that I take. Just because when you're swinging on a 7, because it's agility 7, you don't necessarily need a lot of those green dice for accuracy. There's different things that you can do to kind of make them a bit more accurate, whether it's a perk or whatever. So there's things you can do to make them more accurate. So you're just rolling black dice. You're just rolling damage dice. Now it's swingy. I'm going to tell you that right now. You're not going to consistently do damage. So if you're going into this going, I need to consistently do damage, this is not the weapon for you. But if you're going into this thinking, one of 2 things is going to happen. I'm going to send this little goofball into melee, and I'm either doing no damage, or I'm doing all the damage, and I don't care which. Then this is it. You know, I've charged this into, like, Grognak, for example, and I spiked, like, ridiculous spiked. And I think I did, like, 7 or 8 damage into Grognak. I'd have to ask my brother. I don't remember at this point, but it was meaty, and he was just like, what the hell? You know, because it was that shock of, oh my god, his dice are really hot. You know, that's what I like about the Fire Axe, is that it's got that, like, high risk, high reward feel, and it only takes one good fight with a Fire Axe for people to really, like, start to overreact. You know, a big part of my play style isn't necessarily what's on the table, it's how do you interpret what's on the table. And again, like I know some of the people watching have seen some of my 40k videos and my take on Incubi. Incubi might not be crazy good, but people will look at Incubi and they know what they do, and they can help dictate the flow of the game. And that's how I kind of look at Psychos also, is I don't need them to consistently do damage if my opponent knows what they do and they can dictate the flow of the game. If by putting a Psycho in one spot causes you to change everything that you're doing, I don't necessarily need that Psycho to do damage because it's already influencing the game without it doing damage. But yeah, I love it. The Spear is another one that I really like because it gives you quick action attack, which is an excellent thing for a Psycho to have. And then if you roll a Nuka-Cola bottle, you get an action point. So it's awesome. And you're rolling a black, a yellow, and a green die. You get that Psycho, you get the additional black die. So it's one of those where you're getting a lot of different dice. You're very likely to hit. You get the action point on a Nuka-Cola bottle. There's mods you can give it to give it a blue die, if I remember correctly. Or to give it like bonus damage, or to give it an armor break. So there's a lot of things you can do there. And overall, I think the Spear is a great value, especially, again, on a Psycho who's really only there for the melee. They're not there for shooting. Sledgehammer, it does do 2 damage, but 2 yellow dice is just kind of meh. Like, to me, yellow dice are great for augmenting, but you don't want that to be your primary. So if you've got something that gives you yellow, it's worth taking, but you don't want a weapon that focuses on yellow. That's, again, just my personal opinion on it. You could have a totally different opinion, and it also is going to depend on what you're playing against the most. The Shish Kebab is fantastic. I would also consider that. It is kind of expensive, but it is 2 damage and it's energy, which is not something you get access to a lot in Melee. You don't get access to a lot of Melee energy. So the Shish Kebab is a great weapon for a Psycho because, again, you can get extra black dice reliably. You can get it to 3, 4, 5 damage reliably. If you roll that star, your opponent gets burned, which is really good. It's not amazing, but it is good, and it's beneficial. Having burn is better than not having it. So there is that. And a lot of the other stuff is not necessarily worth it for the Psycho. Like you tend to want to keep them cheaper. You want them to do like high damage type weapons. And that's, again, personal preference. But that's what I would do. Is that Shish Kebab is about the best I would put on them. I tend to lean towards the spear or the fire axe. The machete gladius is solid. And those are, to me, like, that's what I gravitate towards for the Psychos. All my regular raiders do end up getting dog tag fists just because, man, are they good. Like, that is just a phenomenal cheap weapon. And then, what is a stun pack? If you damage a model and you roll that, you can stun people. That's okay. If the attack. So again, like here, you can add a blue die to a weapon if they don't already have it, and give it an extra ability, and it's fairly cheap. And adding that blue die to a weapon that already has, like the spear, right? It has Nuka-Cola bottles give you an action point. So if you find a mod that adds a blue die to it, it just gives you a lot more likelihood to get those action points anyway. And that's really what you're looking for when you're taking those Psychos, is you need to figure out what it is you want them to do, and you just like lean super hard into it. And that's what we touched on in the last episode, was they're a specialist unit. Sure, they can shoot, but that's not what they're there for. They're a specialist unit. So let's look at the chems, and then from there, oh, that's not what we wanted. From there, we will probably be wrapping up. Let's just go to the Psycho again. Let's change equipment. What are the die colors? Hey, that's a great question. So give me a second to pull up my chems here, and I will break that down for you briefly, James. The dies, so Wasteland Warfare uses proprietary dice. They're 12-sided, and a D20 for hit rolls. The D20 is kind of weird because it has like a cog and a bunch of different bullshit symbols on it. Like, all you really need to know is it's your hit rolls. And if you roll an X, it basically means you automatically miss. And if you roll an exclamation point, for all intents and purposes, it means you automatically hit. That's not... There's a lot of nuance there, but that's effectively what it means. But all the other dice that have the different colors are effect dice. And you use them when you make skill rolls. So the game is one part RPG, one part skirmish game. And it'll work for either. And it actually works very well for both. Yellow dice are armor dice, and they give you more likelihood to almost like, and I'm going to try to use a lot of 40k language just because I know you're going to understand it. Armor dice give you a chance to increase the AP of your weapons. What a slob, right down the front of my shirt. Black dice give you a chance to increase the damage of your weapon. Green dice give you the chance to increase the accuracy of your weapon. So the green die might have like a +1 to hit bonus or a +2 to hit bonus. It doesn't mean every face has it. It's got like some blank faces. It's got those. It's got a few different things. And then the blue die is what we call a special effect die. And it just has a bunch of weird symbols on it. And the symbols themselves don't hold any meaning unless the weapon holds meaning. And I'll show you what I mean on the screen in just a second here. We'll pull up that spear again. Or the dog tag fist. So the dog tag fist gives you a yellow die, which gives you 1 die to try to increase your AP. It gives you a green die, which gives you 1 die to try to increase your accuracy. And then if you roll this Nuka-Cola symbol right here, the little bottle symbol, on any die, it will stun your opponent. And that's what that symbol means. So the green die has like 1 or 2 Nuka-Cola bottles on it, even though it's the effect. Like all of the dice have like 1 or 2 of the Nuka-Cola symbols or a star or something, regardless of what they are. And so like you have maybe like a 1 in 12 chance to roll this symbol, maybe like 1 in 6 with these 2 dice. But then if you find something that adds the blue die to it, the blue die has 4 of those symbols on it, if I remember right. So now you've just increased it. And that's all that blue die does, is basically says if you have anything that uses these symbols, I'm just going to make it more likely that whatever that effect is will trigger. So that's how the different dice interact with the game. And it's kind of a weird system because it's more akin to like old D&D THAC0, where the lower the number, the better on most things, because you're using your special attributes as a threshold. So like, show unit card. Yep. So if you wanted to make a melee attack with this Psycho, this little knife here is your melee skill. So you look for the little knife, you find out what attribute it is tied to. So in this case, it's tied to agility. Your agility is a 7. So when you roll the hit die, you need a 7 or lower. And then the green die will have modifiers that will improve that chance of rolling a 7 or lower. But like I said, it is a D20 to hit, but it's not numbered 1 through 20. It's like numbered 2 through 10 with like some variables and other things on it. So it's kind of a goofy system when you first start playing it. But once you play it, it makes a lot of sense, and it's actually pretty intuitive. I hope that answered your question. As you know, I tend to over-explain things. So, all right, so we're going to jump into chems real quick. That's not what I wanted. I did it again. Oops, I did it again. Change equipment. Chems. All right. Fury, pretty solid one. Because, and for those that don't know, the way chems work, you have 3 slots, right? Obviously, it looks like on Fury you only have 2. Just because it doesn't have the dots at the bottom, so I assume that means it only has 2. Absolutely, buddy. Yeah. I'm glad you knew what THAC0 was. Absolutely, man. So you look at the bottom of your chem card, and on the far right, you'll see a column with 1 dot, and then a column with 2 dots, and then usually there's a column with 3 dots. With Fury, there's no column with 3 dots, so the assumption for me is that you don't have a 3rd column. But you just start with the 2 dots the first turn you use it, and then the next turn, you go to 1 dot, and then if you're a raider, you stay on that column, and then it goes away. But normally it goes away after the next turn. So Fury's okay. It does give you armor. It adds 2 to your armor values. And then it does give you an additional black die for melee only. So it's not bad. But I just think Psycho personally is better. Let's see. And maybe, was it Orange Mentats? Like, Med-X is okay. Again, I tend to take things that are going to maximize their damage output. Overdrive's okay. On the the first turn you use it, you get an additional black die in melee. The second turn, you get an additional black die in melee. And then the whole time, you get access to criticals and +1 to strength. So, again, not terrible, but not really what you want for a Psycho. Psycho, on the other hand, because these are all cumulative. They all stack, just so you guys are aware. So the first turn that you use Psycho, you get the +2 for the first column for all of your armor. You get the black die in melee, and you get +1 for all of your armor. So the first turn you use it, you actually get +3 to your armor values. Then the next turn, you get +1 to your armor values and the black die. So you get 2 turns with a black die in melee, and then you're going to get 1 turn with +3, and then you're going to get 3 turns if you're a raider with +1 to all your armors. And that's why I love Psycho for my Psychos, because it's the only way I can really play them the way I like to and give them an armor value. And because using a chem isn't actually an action, you can actually charge in, slap your dude with some Psycho, then make your melee attacks and get all of those benefits. And then if your opponent swings back that turn, or at least before you activate, you got a 3 armor, which is really good for all of your armor, energy, melee, etc. So to me, Psycho is the chem you put on these things because it increases their damage output, it increases their survivability, and it hopefully makes sure they at least trade. Because that's what a Psycho is it's a trading piece. You're going to send it somewhere and it's going to die, but it needs to trade up. It needs to either kill what it hits, or it needs to do enough damage that something else can kill it easily and reliably before it dies. And whatever you do that to needs to be more important than the Psycho was. Let's see, Doctor's Bag. Jet's okay. I personally wouldn't put Jet on a Psycho. There's other things that Jet's better for. Yeah, no, it wasn't Orange Mentats. Orange Mentats I think I put on my Sniper. Psycho Buff, SPE, Endurance. Psycho Buff's okay. It gives you a black die in melee. It gives you +1 to all your armor. It does give you +2 to strength, but that's not super relevant for the Psychos. Because again, they're only strength 3. There's just better things to put that on. So yeah, that's, to me, you put Psycho on them. That's just the best chem for them. I mean, that's arguably why they're named that. I mean, it's not, but you know what I mean. So it's one of those, like, Fire Axe, Psycho, torpedo it into melee with a dog, get the extra green die for charging, get the extra green die for the dog. You're now going to roll 4 black die, 2 green die, and then if you added a mod that does anything else, and you're just going to roll dice and you're going to let Jesus take the wheel, and hopefully that Psycho can trade up. That's how I like to play my Psychos. And like I said, I tend to hide them behind other models to give them cover. And if you don't take Coulter, try it. It will help you so much. And again, I'm not out here trying to tell you, man, oh, if you don't take Coulter, you're wrong. I'm just telling you, like, if you are struggling to do things with this gang, running Coulter will make it a little easier for you. He's absurd. Where are we at on time? We're at an hour. I'll just touch on Coulter briefly, and then we'll wrap up. Just so everybody who has been watching knows exactly why I'm like, yo, guys, like, for realsies, Coulter is the bee's knees. He's exasperating and exhausting, and that's what I'm here for. I'm here to make sure you don't have a good time. I'm just playing. All right, so Coulter. First of all, he gets his power armor, which is already baked in. Like, it's free for him, but he's also not cheap. He's 152 points. So Coulter is strength 8. So he's already going to hit very reliably in melee. He also gets the bonus black die in melee because he's strength 7 or higher. So right off the bat, awesome. He's perception 6, which means he can take, you know, he's pretty reliable with a pistol or a rifle. He's endurance 9, so he's going to have 9 health. And then he's got strong armor because of his power armor. So he's going to be, compared to the rest of your raiders, fairly tanky. He's fast. He's in power armor and moves red. He is fast. Take him. He's got a red range aura, and then his aura is -2 for shooting if you're not shooting Coulter. So if you want to shoot one of those Psychos and they're within red and line of sight of Coulter, your opponent takes a -2 hit penalty. In addition, he doesn't suffer the -2 modifiers to quick action skill tests and uses standard color range rules for quick action movement. He's a cheater. I'm telling you guys, like, if you are struggling in this game with raiders, Coulter will make your life easier. Just because you can build him to be tanky. You can give him, like, Life Giver to give him an extra health, for example. There's things you can do to make him harder to hit or a bit more resilient. So again, like, there's just stuff you can do to make him a little tankier. He has quick action melee. He's gonna hit hard. So he's really who should get the shish kebab. Because again, if you give him the shish kebab and you give him something like Psycho, he's gonna roll a bucket of dice. It is absurd. And then you get those psychos in there, and they're also going to just do damage. So I'm not going to dive into them too deep. We'll do a whole separate, when we dig into the more named character style aspect of the game, we'll dig into Coulter and how we like to load him out. And James, if you're still on here, that is one of the more interesting aspects of this game, is that your named characters are just dudes with names. They're not locked into any kind of loadout specifically, usually. So, like, this guy is a named character. You can still give him whatever kind of weapons and perks. And perks would be more akin to, like, warlord traits. You can give him, like, that type of stuff. And he's not locked into anything specific because he's a named character. So you can kind of build them however you want them to work. And that's what I really enjoy about this game, is there's that level of customization that just, like, got stripped away from a lot of other games. Not just 40K, like a lot of other games have had it kind of stripped away so that it's easier to get into, you know? So it's one of those, like, one of the big draws for me was just like, oh man, I could just kind of, like, do what I want. And this is fun, but there's still enough structure that it's not like playing Magic, you know? So that's going to wrap up episode 2 for the Raiders. Next week, we're going to dig into more Blood Bowl. We're going to talk about Old World Alliance a little bit more in depth, and some things that I found that have worked with them. And we're going to discuss a Tampa preview. As long as they don't swing games too much, I suppose. And that's the big thing, though, James, is exactly, like, the game itself isn't necessarily, like, balanced or unbalanced, because everybody can generally take a lot of the same stuff. The faction bonuses are all pretty good, and they all work without breaking the game. Like, for Raiders, Raiders get, every time you take a chem, basically that chem lasts one turn longer. So usually chems might last like 3 turns. Well, for Raiders, they last 4. And games are 5 to 6 turns, depending on, like, your scenario or mission. So it's one of those, like, so Raiders just get their drugs to last a turn longer. Survivors all start with a armor token, which just gives them a 1-use damage reduction. And then, you know, like Enclave, I don't think they have, like, a really big faction bonus as much as they have, like, a lot of weird layering that can happen. I could be wrong on that. And then Institute have some weird stuff. So, like, all the factions have their own, like, gimmick. But generally speaking, they all have access to a lot of the same stuff. And what really tends to balance or unbalance the games isn't so much, like, the factions or the rules as much as it is, like, the terrain. You know, because any game with guns and melee, guns are usually going to be better simply because you can shoot people instead of having to be next to them. So if you don't have enough terrain and you play Raiders, you're going to struggle because you're just not going to get there. So, like I said, it's one of those, like, the things that I've found that are the toughest nut to crack have been anything in power armor, but most factions have access to power armor to some degree. So there's not this feeling of, like, well, you get this and I don't. Now, obviously, if you're playing Brotherhood of Steel or Enclaves, you have access to a lot more power armor. And if you're playing Raiders, your power armor tends to be shittier, but you still have access to it, and you still have access to tools to overcome it. Poison, for example, like if you have a venomous weapon, it'll just bypass power armor. So it's one of those, like, there's a tool or a trick for just about everything. And it's one of those where it's just really, it's just based on how you want to play it. Do you want a more silly kind of, like, over-the-top game? Well, then you play it that way. You want a more balanced experience, which is where I come from, you know, obviously with my comp background in 40K. Then you hop into the battle mode rules because there's a lot more restrictions in your list building and stuff like that then. So, yeah. So again, preview to Tampa. We're going to talk about Old World Alliance next week. And then the following week, we're going to touch on Scavers, which is a Raiders unit. So the Fallout will be every other week, or the Blood Bowl will be every other week. we're going to touch on scavers, and we're going to talk about what I like for scavers, and then we'll probably do an episode detailing like the actual raiders. And then the other thing I wanted to make sure we talked about was one of the things people have asked me about is like, how do you overcome power armor? We'll do a whole episode on playing against power armor with raiders also. So thanks for watching. Hope everybody enjoyed the video. You guys have a great weekend. And if you're stateside, happy 4th of July. Don't blow your fingers off. Later, guys.